This précis takes a look at Jean-Francois Lyotard's The Postmodern Condition, a report on knowledge, with an emphasis on the impact from postmodern capital and consumer culture. Jean-Francois Lyotard, born in 1924, was a French post-structuralist philosopher. Interesting note, the postmodern condition was commissioned by the government of Quebec and published first in 1979. He defined postmodernism as incredulity towards meta-narratives and rejects the idea of a master discourse. Lyotard speaks to the commodification of knowledge, saying the relationship of suppliers and users of knowledge assumes the form already taken by the relationship of commodity producers and consumers. Knowledge is and will be produced in order to be sold, perpetuating the link between production and labor and a widening gap of class distinction. Lyotard states, knowledge in the form of an informational commodity indispensable to productive power is already and will continue to be a major stake in the worldwide competition for power. He presciently identified it is conceivable that nation states will one day fight for control of information, just as they battled in the past for control over territory, and afterwards for control of access to and exploitation of raw materials and cheap labor. In contemporary late capitalism and postmodernity, the general public sees this play out in a struggle for advancing knowledge in an age of rapidly augmenting reality, information distortion, and disinformation. Multinational U.S. tech giants such as Apple, Google, and Amazon compete for individual users' personal data with foreign global behemoths such as the Chinese tech conglomerate Huawei to harvest and dissect information to improve knowledge of consumer decision-making. And nation-states have begun to jail executive actors in this new data and information war. While the mere political and social context interests many scholars and academics, Lyotard investigated the computerized age of cybernetics and informatics as it relates to knowledge creation and dissemination in the university, recognizing shifting paradigms in education contributing to and simultaneously resulting from corporate control of economic and social progress. It is important to attempt to define the conflict Lyotard realizes, stating knowledge and power in the computer age are simply two sides of the same question. Who decides what knowledge is, and who knows what needs to be decided? Who will have access? Who will determine which channels or data are forbidden? And will the state simply be a user among other users? Formerly, the goal of knowledge was envisioned as the emancipation of the people, with a harmony between the needs and hopes of individuals or groups as primary function of the system. Truth and justice sat in opposition to speculation and legitimation in terms of social law was promulgated by a democratically elected body, not as a service to economic growth and capital progress. But now the true goal of the system, the reason it programs itself like a computer, is the optimization of the global relationship between input and output, performativity. That is the best possible input-output equation, where the only credible goal is power, capital production and consumption, wielding power and charting knowledge through capital expansion and efficiency. This leads Lyotard to raise another vital question in considering this new capitalistic approach to knowledge creation and the computerized recording and compiling of information, asking who will have access to the information these machines have in storage to guarantee the right decisions are made. Information is almost certain to be suppressed unless it benefits corporate growth and innovation. Lyotard states the ruling class is and will continue to be the class of decision makers. They establish the rules and the language for knowledge development, suppress competition, and corrupt system performativity with political influence. Lyotard recognized this, leading to widening class gap as society shifts to dependency on technology syndicates and higher education for management of labor. When considering knowledge as competition, Lyotard juxtaposes narrative knowledge, evolving since the end of the Enlightenment in Western modernity, and the transition to scientific knowledge being created in the computerized era, reliant on the vision of society as a totality within a knowledge system. Narrative knowledge relies on legitimation through discourse and approvability within language games. It maneuvers between players acting as senders and addressees. Scientific knowledge, says Lyotard, unlike narrative knowledge, is no longer a direct and shared component of the game, but indirect and gives rise to institutions run by qualified partners. Within these bounds, Lyotard identifies research and competence for understanding the system at the level of a sender or teacher-leader as the key function of progression, making technology, its improvements, and innovative function the center and knowledge a marginal output. Knowledge is no longer the subject, but in service of the subject. Improvements to technology, tools, and compensation for research and teaching requires funding for advancement and innovation. And according to Lyotard, capitalism solves the scientific problem of research by funding its own way, directly by financing research departments in private companies and universities, in which it demands for performativity and recommercialization orient research first and foremost towards technological applications. Lyotard also notes scientists, technicians, and instruments are purchased not to find truth, but to augment power. Science becomes a force for production, knowledge becomes a tool of capital, consumption a need of labor. With the lack of need of creative critical thinkers at the knowledge level, Lyotard says the traditional teacher is replaceable by memory banks and computer data banks, and yields to intelligent terminals placed at students' disposal. Yesterday's libraries give way to Google and Bing, and knowledge is examined and absorbed through laptops and smartphones. Lyotard also notes pedagogy would not necessarily suffer. The students will still have to be taught something, not content, but how to use the terminals. Access to information, or a library card as sarcastically referenced by Will, has parity with knowledge transfer in the form of education, seemingly eliminating the knowledge gap, but ever widening the class gap. American universities and education systems have suffered along this logic as adjunct professor employment has significantly overtaken tenure-track professors in statistics dating back to the 1960s, validating Lyotard's proclamation that this will lead to the death of the professor and the standardization of functional tool use. Finally, Lyotard recognizes postmodern science is changing the meaning of the word knowledge, producing not the known but the unknown, seeking a type of dark matter as it devalues matter. He recognizes an act of terror as knowledge providers say, adapt your aspirations to our ends or else, in invitations to all interlocutors in the language game.